August 5, 1944. Chelmsford Airfield sank into a hush so deep it felt like the world had been wrapped in felt. A low fog pooled along the perimeter track, swallowing the ankles of ground crew as they moved by habit, hands black with oil and graphite. From the operations hut, a single bulb bled yellow onto a desk piled with forms. On top sat a fresh entry, time 2:13. Unknown shadow departed into darkness. Minutes later, flash at altitude. Then silence. Outside, two Pratt & Whitney R2800s wound up from a purr to a war-long howl. The night trembled. The new machine rolled forward, black paint drinking the light until it seemed less an airplane than a cutout of absence sliding toward the runway's edge. They called it the Black Widow. It was the first warplane built to hunt in the dark on its own terms, a three-man craft with its eyes in its nose. Inside that bulbous radome, a set of delicate dipoles and valves warmed to life, the cathode glow painting the radar operator's cheekbones a ghostly green. He wore the headphones low, as if listening to the air think. On his scope, phosphor woke in arcs and blinks. The sweep line rotated, unhurried and implacable, as though measuring not distance but time remaining for someone out over the channel. Control, Night Fighter 1 rolling, the pilot said, breath steady, each word producing a small cloud on his oxygen mask. The tower answered with the voice of a man trying not to lean toward a window he could no longer see through. Cleared for takeoff. Vector will follow. The pilot eased the throttles. The airplane shrugged free of the earth, wheels folding into the dark like a secret finally kept. Only the prop discs remained visible, two faint circular insults to the fog. They leveled over black water. England fell away behind them into the static glow of distant towns under blackout. Dim pools, then nothing. The interphone clicked. The radar operator's tone had that peculiar calm you hear in surgeons and men inside burning buildings. Sweep live. Range 20. Noise floor is low. A beat of silence. Contact. Bearing 07. 2 miles. Angels 9. We don't see him, but he's there. He, whoever he was, had counted on the same old covenant. That night belonged to the attacker and fear to the ground. Heinkel crews trusted darkness like a second skin. The English coast, the harbors, the railheads. Under cloud cover, these were routes they had flown so often they could navigate by smell. Tonight, a He-111 droned shoreward at 9,000 feet, crew clustered by road around gauges gone soft with vibration. The navigator traced a line with a pencil stub. The pilot ran a knuckle along the throttle quadrant, and the dorsal gunner's eyes watered from wind knifing through the frame's hairline gaps. Darkness had carried them this far through the war. It would carry them again. Turn starboard 20, the pilot of the Widow said, his hands light on the yoke, like a man guiding an animal that might spook. The plane yielded, a shadow banking into deeper shadow. The radar operator's voice sharpened by a degree, closing to 15. Target course steady. Altitude unchanged. The gunner, crouched behind his 20mm cannon, tapped the shoulder of the pilot's seat twice. Ready. Up ahead there was nothing but the kind of black that erases edges. And then, there, a softer dark against the dark, a smudge no human eye could swear to without help. The pilot felt it more than saw it. The operator read it in the sweep. 12. 11. Merge in 10. Over the channel the air smelt faintly metallic, like old coins. Frost formed on the canopy frame in pale whiskers. The pilot trimmed. The engines sang that measured note they found when all vibrations line up and the machine turns briefly into an instrument. Range 800. The radar operator's voice dipped lower, as if not to wake the night. Drift is left to right. He doesn't know. The gunner exhaled. Somewhere far below, a trawler's lantern winked and vanished. Visual, the pilot said, and with the word the smudge became a shape. A tailplane glint, a hint of cockpit framing, the slow-wheeling cross-section of a bomber riding its own small weather. The Heinkel kept to its pace like a clock. The Black Widow slid parallel, patient as a cat. The pilot placed the glowing bead where training and instinct said it belonged, just forward of where a man would sit who did not know he was about to become history. His thumb found the cool knurl of the trigger. For a breath, there was nothing. Only the thrum and the faint tick of the radar's time base counting out the small integers of fate. Then he pressed. The guns wrote light onto the night, a clean, stuttering white that chewed air into sparks. Tracers traced the arc of an idea becoming deed. The first burst walked across the Heinkel's starboard wing. 2, 3 impacts, a spurt of fuel atomized into fire. The second drilled the engine nacelle. The prop feathered violently and then seized. A momentary circle turned squared by heat. Someone in the Heinkel must have shouted. The dorsal gun never fired. The bomber heeled, not dramatically, but like a man who has just realized the stairs are not where he left them. Flame licked back along the skin, then took hold. Orange in a place that had refused color all night. Splash. The gunner muttered, not for the sea, but because there is no other word in the lexicon for endings witnessed from above. The bomber's spine arched. A panel tore free and spun away like a tin moon. The crew inside were silhouettes for a fraction of a second, cutouts against their own slipping world. Then the Heinkel tipped nose low and fell out of the script it had been reciting since takeoff. The sea caught it without ceremony, a brief, hard blossom of light, and then the black reasserted its rule. They circled once. Oil smell, cordite, a faint sweetness like burnt varnish soaked the cockpit. The radar scope showed only the steady sweep again, clean of echoes, a meadow after cattle have passed. The operator logged the time, 2:29. The pilot did not speak. The gunner looked at his hands, surprised to find them steady. Back at Chelmsford, the duty officer wrote the line he would remember for the rest of his life. We saw only a black shape come out of darkness, then a flash in the sky, then quiet again. He underlined quiet, as if the word itself had changed meaning. On the dispersal, a mechanic with frost on his eyebrows listened to the returning engines and knew, without needing a briefing, that something old had ended in the channel. Night had long been an ally to the men who crossed water to bomb sleeping cities. It had been whether you could fly inside, a kindness extended by the universe to pilots who needed a margin. But that evening a new rule had been written in green phosphor and cannon flare. Darkness could be seen. A crew who had trusted the invisible discovered it could look back. They taxied to a stop, prop arcs collapsing to stillness. The canopy slid open and let in a slice of cold that smelled of grass and oil. No one cheered. Someone handed up a thermos. Steam curled into the cockpit and vanished. The radar operator tore the page from his pad and passed it forward. The pilot read the neat numbers, nodded once, and set the paper on the console, as if affixing a label to a night that would not forget itself. Over the channel, the last ripples spread and disappeared. The wreck sank. Sky and sea resumed their pact of mutual darkness. It was the first night when the sky was no longer safe, even in the dark. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Between 1940 and 1943, while Europe burned each night under the hum of German bombers, a small group of engineers in California worked in a world of quiet light. Their mission sounded impossible: to build a plane that could see in the dark. The U.S. Army called it Project Night Fighter, and it was born not out of curiosity, but desperation. The man at the center was Jack Northrop, a designer known for his calm voice and his sketches that seemed to think faster than words. His team worked inside a hangar sealed against sunlight, blackout curtains covering the windows so they could test instruments under artificial night. The air was heavy with the smell of hot metal, glue, and sweat. On a wooden table lay their greatest gamble, a radar small enough to fit inside an airplane's nose. The device, the SCR-720, looked fragile, a cluster of glass tubes and copper wires. But when it powered on, the green pulse on the oscilloscope moved like a heartbeat. That faint glow meant something extraordinary. A plane could now feel another aircraft moving miles away, invisible to the human eye. One engineer whispered, "It's like teaching metal to dream." The plane built around it didn't look like a dream. The prototype rolled out in May 1942, massive, black, and awkward, with twin engines and a glass bubble nose. Someone muttered, "It's too heavy to fly." Northrop didn't argue. He simply watched as the pilot throttled up the Pratt & Whitney, our 2800s, and the beast began to roll. Dust swirled across the tarmac. The engines roared, and against every prediction, the machine lifted off. It stayed in the air for only 20 minutes, but when it landed, the silence on the ground was different, thicker, expectant. One officer said quietly, "We just built a ghost." In those years, ghosts were exactly what the Allies needed. Over London, Hamburg, and Warsaw, the night was ruled by German bombers that seemed untouchable once the sun went down. Civilians prayed under shaking roofs. Pilots in the Royal Air Force admitted they were helpless. By the time they saw the enemy, it was already too late. America watched and learned. When Pearl Harbor fell, the idea of a night fighter turned from an experiment into a command. The message was clear: if the enemy uses darkness, we will own it. At Northrop's plant, the work never stopped. Sparks lit the hangar through every night shift. Men welded wings in the orange glow of torches, while radar specialists tested wiring by touch. Pilots trained in total blackout, memorizing every switch and dial. A photograph of the bombed ruins of Coventry hung on the wall with 3 words written in chalk beneath it: "Never again here." By 1943, the design was finished. They painted it jet black, a color that swallowed light completely. It carried 4 20mm cannons, 4 50 caliber machine guns, and a crew of 3: pilot, gunner, radar operator. To the untrained eye, it looked more like an insect than a plane. When floodlights hit its curves, it seemed to disappear again, edges dissolving back into shadow. That's when someone coined its name, the Black Widow. Captain Herman Ernst, one of the first men to fly it, described the feeling in his logbook. Inside, there's only the glow of the radar and the hum of the engines. You don't see the world, you sense it. The plane feels alive, like it's hunting. The aircraft was strange, heavy, and temperamental, but when the radar worked, it was terrifyingly precise. The operator would whisper bearings into the intercom, cold numbers, quiet as prayer, and the pilot would turn the plane toward a target he couldn't see. To the enemy, it must have felt like the night itself had turned against them. Still, for all its power, the Widow was born from fear. Engineers and pilots alike understood its purpose: to end the killing that came from the sky each night. The Black Widow wasn't built to conquer, it was built to find. To pull unseen predators out of the dark and make them visible, even for a second. That was enough. By the end of 1943, the first production models were shipped to Britain. The official report said only aircraft P-61 approved for operational service. But among those who had built her, the tone was different. They knew they had crossed an invisible line. Soon, over the coast of France and the black waters of the Channel, the night would change forever. The hunters would become the hunted, and darkness would never again belong entirely to fear. August 1944. Western Europe slept under a trembling sky. Over Normandy, a lone P-61 Black Widow carved through clouds, its twin engines humming low and even. The night was clear, but the world below was burning. Fields smoldering, villages scarred by weeks of invasion. Inside the plane, 3 men sat surrounded by the glow of instruments, each breath fogging the canopy. The pilot, Lieutenant Sam O'Neill, kept his voice steady. "Radar on." "On and clean," replied Sergeant Frank Dugan, hunched over the glowing green scope. "We've got a possible contact, 2 miles out, same altitude." His tone was quiet, confident, but the words tightened the air inside the cockpit. O'Neill scanned the darkness. Nothing, just the faint shimmer of starlight. But the radar didn't lie. He eased the throttle, the Widow dipping into its silent run. Below, the English Channel reflected nothing, a black mirror hiding everything. In another stretch of sky, a Heinkel He-111 lumbered homeward, its crew exhausted after a failed bombing run. The German pilot trusted the dark, it had always protected them. For years, the night had been their ally. But not tonight. "Contact closing," Dugan whispered. 1 mile, 800 yards. The gunner in the rear turret gripped his controls, muscles tense. O'Neill's eyes flicked to the horizon, and then he saw it, a faint silver glint. "Got you," he murmured, thumb tightening on the trigger. 8 guns erupted. The night ripped open in red flashes. The Heinkel jerked violently, one engine bursting into flame. For an instant, the bomber glowed like a dying star before tumbling into the sea. Then, silence. No explosion, no cry. Just the sea swallowing another secret. "Confirmed," Dugan said, writing down the coordinates. He looked up. O'Neill was staring ahead, unmoving. You okay? The pilot exhaled. They never saw us, he said. Minutes later, the radio crackled. Widow 7, return to base. Negative, O'Neill replied. We're staying up another 20. They turned south. The radar swept in rhythmic circles. Ping, pause, ping. The Widow became part of the night itself, an invisible predator in a world of sound. Dugan adjusted his dials. Then, a blip. Small. Fast. Another one. Might be a fighter. Let's see what he's hunting, O'Neill said. The radar mark zigzagged across the screen, unpredictable, erratic. Then, from nowhere, the faint flash of exhaust ahead. A Messerschmitt Bf-110 shot across their path, its wings briefly catching moonlight. He's seen us, Dugan shouted. O'Neill banked hard. Tracers streaked past the canopy. Hold on. He rolled left, diving under the German's line of fire. The gunner's voice cut through the intercom. Target in sight. Take him. The Widow's cannons thundered. The Messerschmitt shuddered, one wing snapping clean off. A streak of fire spiraled downward until it disappeared into the cloud deck. Silence again. They circled once, scanning for wreckage. There was none, only the echo of their own engines. By dawn, Chelmsford Airfield was wrapped in fog. The Widow landed smoothly, its black paint still slick with dew. O'Neill climbed down, shoulders stiff, face pale. An officer met him on the tarmac with a clipboard. Any contacts? 2, O'Neill answered. Both gone. They never saw us coming. The officer nodded, scribbling notes. But O'Neill wasn't looking at him. He was staring at the horizon, where the first light of morning bled into gray. The night was over, but he knew it would come again. And when it did, the hunters would be waiting. In the following weeks, reports reached Berlin, bombers vanishing, patrols disappearing mid-flight. No wreckage, no survivors. Luftwaffe crews began to whisper about the invisible plane, a black shape that rose out of nothing, killed, and vanished back into the void. The Germans had built their empire on the terror of darkness. Now the dark belonged to someone else. From that August onward, every pilot who flew under a moonless sky carried a single thought. Somewhere above, unseen, something was watching. And if you ever saw a flash in the clouds, just one spark, quick as a heartbeat, it was already too late. Autumn 1944, Western Europe. The night skies above Belgium were restless, a churn of storm clouds, and the dull orange glow of burning towns far below. Allied convoys crept eastward toward the Rhine, headlights covered, engines muffled. From the ground, soldiers occasionally looked up and saw faint flashes high above. Not lightning, not flak, something else. The air war never truly slept anymore. At 22:10, radar stations near Liège picked up a slow, heavy cluster approaching from the east. Heinkels. Maybe Junkers. Maybe worse. The order went out immediately, scramble the night fighters. 2 Black Widows from the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron roared to life on the slick tarmac, engines coughing in the drizzle before rising into thunder. Lieutenant Tom Riley led the first crew. His voice crackled through the radio. Control, Widow 4-1 rolling. We'll find them. The second aircraft followed close behind, twin black shadows lifting into storm-torn clouds. The rain swallowed them whole. Inside the cockpit, the world was red and green. The radar operator, Sergeant Earl Shorty James, leaned over his scope. Static danced across the screen, lightning flashes spiking the signal. I've got clutter from the storm, he muttered, trying to filter it out. Outside, the storm raged, lightning slicing through the night like artillery fire. The Widow shuddered as turbulence gripped its wings. Riley fought the controls, eyes fixed on the instruments. We'll lose them in this soup, he said. Then James spoke again, voice calm but sharp. Wait, I've got something. Big return, 2 o'clock high. Distance 2.5 miles. Riley squinted into the void. Nothing, just the flash of a storm cell ahead. You sure it's not the weather? No, sir, James said. Weather doesn't move that steady. He adjusted the gain. A green dot crept across the phosphor screen. It's a Heinkel He-177. Slow climb. Probably lining up for the bridges at Nijmegen. Copy. Let's make it quick. Riley pushed the throttles forward. The engines howled as the Widow sliced through sheets of rain. Static hissed through the radio. Thunder cracked so close it rattled their teeth. They were flying blind, guided only by the heartbeat pulse of the radar. Range closing. 1 mile. He's right in it. Just above that thunderhead, James said. A flash lit the sky, and for a split second the enemy appeared, a black cross on gray wings, barely visible before darkness closed again. Riley grinned. Got you. He leveled out, thumb pressing the trigger. The cannons roared, their tracers vanishing into cloud. For a moment there was nothing. Then a sudden burst of orange flame inside the storm. The fireball flickered, reflected by the rain. Direct hit, James said. His voice shook, not from fear but disbelief. He's gone. Below them, the glow faded. The Heinkel's burning wreckage plunged into the fields near the Meuse. Riley exhaled, releasing tension he hadn't noticed building in his shoulders. Hell of a fireworks show, he said softly. The second Black Widow, Widow 4-2, was still somewhere in the storm. Their radio cut in suddenly. We lost radar contact, getting heavy interference. Wait, correction, flare below. Riley craned his neck. Through the rain, a red flash bloomed low on the horizon, then another. For one terrifying moment, everyone thought it was an American plane going down. But the next transmission came clear, breathless with adrenaline. Negative crash. Target destroyed. Ju-88 confirmed. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the clouds. Two invisible hunters, flying blind, had just wiped an entire bomber wave out of the sky without ever seeing their prey. The storm continued to hammer the region for another hour. Both widows circled until fuel ran low, then limped back toward their base near Florence. The runway was slick, the ground crews waiting with flashlights half covered in red tape. When the first plane touched down, mud sprayed over the tarmac. Mechanics ran forward, shouting over the wind. Riley climbed out, soaked and shivering. The commander met him under the wing. You were supposed to avoid that thunderstorm. Riley looked back toward the clouds. The horizon flickered again, distant and cold. We didn't find the storm, he said quietly. It found them. Inside the debriefing tent, the radar operator poured coffee with shaking hands. The cup trembled, dark liquid spilling onto the table. Sir, he said, you realize what just happened? We fought inside a thunderstorm, and the radar still saw them. Even lightning couldn't blind it. The intelligence officer nodded slowly. Then the rules just changed. Nature's not hiding them anymore. That night, across the front, Allied convoys continued crossing the Rhine. Men heard distant thunder and thought it was weather. It wasn't. It was the sound of air combat they couldn't see, a new kind of war where the enemy died unseen and the killers flew blind but sure. By morning, local villagers found twisted wreckage scattered across the countryside. No survivors. No one could explain how the Germans had been shot down so precisely in the middle of a storm. For centuries, lightning had been nature's weapon. But in that autumn sky, it served a different master. That was the night the darkness itself stopped belonging to chaos. It belonged to the radar. For the first time in human history, night was no longer a force of nature. It was a tool of war. December 1944, the Ardennes. Cold locked the forest in silence. Snow fell like ash between the pines, deadening every sound but the muffled grind of engines. The war here moved through fog and frost, an army of shadows crawling west. Above that frozen maze, another battle waited, one no soldier could see. By the middle of December, Allied radar operators began reporting strange echoes after midnight. Engines overhead, one transmission read. No lights. Moving west. Controllers recognized the pattern, Luftwaffe bombers, searching for bridges across the Meuse. The order was short and sharp. Scramble the widows. From darkened airfields in Belgium, 2P-61 Black Widows clawed into the icy air, their black wings vanishing against the clouds. Inside, the glow of the instruments painted their crews in red and green. In the first plane, Lieutenant John Mercer listened to the hum of his engines while his radar operator, Earl James, hunched over his scope. Contact, 2 miles out, low, James murmured. Mercer adjusted his heading. Got him. Yeah. He's crawling along the treetops. He thinks the dark's his friend. The Widow eased lower, throttles back. Through the canopy, the world was a black ocean of forest. They couldn't see their target, but the radar could. In the second plane, flying 1,000 feet higher, another crew waited for the signal. This was how they hunted now. One Widow guided, the other killed. Over the radio came the quiet voice of the first operator. Leeds got him. handing over. The second widow dove into position, guns armed. A few seconds of silence. Then a burst of light flared below, a short orange bloom, then nothing. The German bomber vanished from the screen. Later reports confirmed it. A Ju-88 destroyed, no survivors. The Germans had thought the night would protect them, as it once had over London and Antwerp. But now it betrayed them. They could no longer trust the dark. Another engagement came 2 nights later. A Heinkel He-111, trying to slip between snowstorms, appeared on the radar like a faint heartbeat. Range 800, said James. Steady climb. Mercer turned into the intercept, his gloved fingers tight on the yoke. They saw nothing, not even a shadow, until a flash of lightning revealed the bomber for half a second. Target in sight, Mercer said. He squeezed the trigger. The Widow's cannons answered in a single thunderous burst. Below them, the Heinkel broke apart, trailing fire that disappeared into the snow clouds. When they landed before dawn, their ground crew said the glow had been visible for 20 miles. German intelligence reports from the same week carried panic. Our crews report black aircraft with no lights attacking from the darkness. Unknown type. Morale shaken. Within days, some Luftwaffe squadrons refused night missions altogether. The skies they once ruled now belonged to someone else. By Christmas, the Ardennes offensive was already faltering. The same snow that blinded tanks also hid the hunters above them. Pairs of widows flew silently, their radars sweeping invisible arcs across the night. One guided, one struck. Sometimes, the bombers never even knew they were under attack until their fuselage erupted in fire. An American operator wrote in his logbook, "They think darkness hides them, but we see them through the night. And that's worse than any searchlight." Between December 16th and January 3rd, over 80 Luftwaffe aircraft were destroyed in night combat. The bridges over the Meuse stood. Allied convoys crossed under frozen stars, unaware that every few miles behind them, burning wrecks still smoked in the snow. Ground troops saw only faint flashes on the horizon, small, silent bursts that came and went like heartbeat pulses. By dawn, the wreckage was scattered across fields and forests. Wings torn, engines twisted, the smell of scorched oil drifting through pine needles. After the battle, captured Luftwaffe pilots spoke of a new superstition, the Not Spinnen, the night spiders. They appear without sound, one survivor said. You never see them until you're already dead. For the first time in years, German pilots began to fear the sunset. Each fading light meant another night they might not come home. Some carried lucky charms. Others faked engine trouble to avoid takeoff. But the widows were patient. They didn't need luck, only darkness. By New Year's Eve, Allied intelligence summarized it simply. Enemy night activity greatly reduced. 61 units effective. Continue paired operations. Between the lines, every pilot understood the truth. The night had changed sides. The men of the Black Widow squadrons didn't celebrate. They knew their next orders were already written. Soon they'd trade snow for heat, pines for palm trees, and German bombers for something far more desperate. Pilots who didn't plan to come back at all. They folded their flight maps of Belgium, packed their radars and ammunition, and looked east. The war in Europe was ending. The war in the Pacific was waiting. And the night, their silent ally, would be waiting there, too. Spring 1945, the Pacific. The heat was different here. It didn't cling like the damp chill of Europe. It pressed, thick and alive, coating skin and steel alike. The night smelled of salt, aviation fuel, and jungle rot. The airstrips on Iwo Jima and Okinawa were raw cuts of coral and dust, lit only by dim red lamps that made every man look ghost-like. And against that horizon, the first Black Widows arrived, veterans of the European darkness, now facing a night that burned instead of froze. The enemy was different too. No heavy bombers. No formation raids. Just single blips, lone aircraft moving fast, low, and erratic. Sometimes they came in slow, pretending to be American. Sometimes they dove straight from the clouds. The briefings called them raiders. The men called them kamikaze. Lieutenant Sam Dorsey, newly transferred from France, stood under his plane before takeoff and listened to the sea breaking on the reefs. They told us it's suicide missions, he said to his radar operator. But how do you fight a man who's already dead? Same way we fought the ones who thought they were invisible, came the answer. You see him first. Their Widow lifted off at 21:17, wheels dragging sparks before tucking under. The ocean below was ink black. The horizon glowed faintly from the fleet's anchored destroyers. Over the radio, the controller's voice cut through static. Unidentified contact inbound. Heading 090. Possible bandit. Radar picked it up seconds later. A single return, small and fast, 20 miles out and closing. He's coming right for the ships, Dorsey said. They climbed to intercept, throttles wide. The engines roared, echoing across the empty sky. Within moments, they could see the glimmer of a prop flame, a pinprick racing toward the fleet. The Japanese pilot was flying an old Zero, stripped of armor, packed with explosives. Range 2000, called the operator. Dorsey lined up, fingers slick with sweat. The Widow bucked as the cannons spat light. For an instant, the night became day, orange tracers stitching across the void. The Zero exploded midair, scattering fragments like falling stars. Below, sailors on the decks of the battleship Tennessee looked up from their stations, mouths open. They hadn't heard the Widow coming. All they saw was the fireball and the rain of metal. Then cheers, wild and distant, rolled up through the darkness. That first success didn't make it easier. Each night brought more. Singles, pairs, sometimes whole swarms of desperate pilots, weaving through clouds of flak to reach the anchored fleets. The radar operators learned to read the rhythm of death, a faint echo that thickened, vanished, then reappeared seconds before impact. The kamikaze were fast, but they weren't invisible. And for the first time, the Americans had a machine that could see through the black sky better than any eye. By late April, Black Widow squadrons were flying constant patrols from dusk until dawn, circling above invasion fleets like silent guardians. Their kill reports grew longer. 2 Oscars destroyed. Vicinity Okinawa, no survivors. Intercepted Val dive bomber before fleet contact. 1 unidentified aircraft exploded on approach. One pilot wrote in his journal, "They come out of nowhere. You don't even think of them as men anymore. Just sparks in the dark. We put them out." But even victory here had a cost. One night, a Widow from the 548th Squadron chased a kamikaze too low. The Japanese plane exploded beneath it, the shockwave flipping the American fighter onto its back. Both crashed into the ocean, their fires merging into one brief flame on the waves. No one could tell who died first. In the days that followed, crews moved more carefully. They spoke little before flights, superstitious now. The Pacific nights were deceiving, so clear and still that radar blips felt unreal, until the flash of an explosion reminded them otherwise. A captured Japanese mechanic later told interrogators, "Our pilots believed death at night was sacred. They didn't expect to be seen." When shown fragments of a P-61's radar set, he simply stared. "You could see them?" he asked quietly. "In the dark," the interrogator wrote in his report. He seemed more shaken by that than by defeat. By June, the Widows had destroyed dozens of attacking aircraft, saving entire convoys from obliteration. For the Navy men below, those unseen black planes became legends. Whenever a kamikaze failed to reach its target, someone would whisper, "The Widow got him." Yet even the crews who flew her knew something darker, that the Pacific wasn't finished with them. Rumors spread of new missions forming farther west, beyond Okinawa, closer to the home islands themselves. The Black Widows were being prepared for operations no one yet dared name. Dorsey's final entry before that transfer read, "We hunted ghosts in Europe. Here, we hunt fire. And the fire never stops coming." The war was shifting again. The night, once tamed, was about to grow wild. May 1945, the Netherlands. The night above the North Sea was thick as ink. No moon, no horizon, only black on black, where the sea and sky blurred into one endless void. Somewhere beneath that darkness lay the flooded fields of the Netherlands, where rumors of peace whispered through the ranks. But until the signal came, the war still belonged to the night. The Black Widow lifted off at 23:10, engines rumbling low over the dimly lit airfield near Leeuwarden. The crew said little. They'd done this too many times to waste words. Captain Robert Hale watched the red glow of his instruments while Sergeant Tom Keegan, his radar operator, adjusted the scope that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. The phosphor line swept its circle, nothing but static and silence. They flew north, climbing through thin clouds. The cockpit smelled of fuel and warm metal. Hale muttered, "One last night." Keegan didn't reply. Every man in the Air Corps knew the end was near, but no one dared believe it out loud. Half an hour passed before something flickered across the radar, a weak echo, distant but steady. "Contact," Keegan said. "Bearing 085. No identification." Hale frowned. "Could be a stray transport." "No IFF signal," came the reply. "And he's coming straight at us." The radio crackled, the voice from ground control faint under static. "Widow 27, be advised. No friendly aircraft in your sector. Intercept and confirm." That was all. Hale pressed the throttle. The Widow surged forward, wings cutting the dark like a knife. Every sound in the cockpit felt louder. The hum of the engines, the clicking of the radar, their own breathing under oxygen masks. "Range, 1.5 miles, said Keegan. "Still closing." "Any signal?" "Negative. Nothing." The pilot's hands tightened around the stick. They'd spent months hunting bombers, but now, with the war nearly over, the thought of shooting down a lost soul weighed heavier than before. Still, an unidentified plane flying north meant one thing: escape. "Arm guns," Hale ordered quietly. The turret hummed as the gunner readied the 20mm cannons. Lightning flared far off in the clouds, painting the sky for half a second, and in that flash, Hale saw it. A black silhouette, twin engines, moving low and fast. "Target confirmed," he said. The Widow dove slightly, lining up the shot. Hale's thumb found the trigger. For an instant, the world froze. Then the cannons erupted, tearing red lines through the night. The tracers reached their mark. A dull orange flare lit the horizon, then split into a blossom of fire before fading back into darkness. "Hit confirmed," Keegan said softly. "0 survivors." They circled once, but there was nothing left to see. Only smoke and sea merging into shadow. The radio broke the silence. 27, report. "Single aircraft destroyed," Hale answered. "Unknown type. No IFF." A pause followed. The controller's voice came back slower, quieter. "Copy that. Return to base." By the time they touched down, it was past 1 in the morning. The red lamps on the runway glowed brighter than usual, as if the world was trying to remember color. Mechanics jogged toward them, faces pale in the light. No one spoke. The war was ending, but routine still ruled. Inside the small operations tent, Hale filled out the after-action form. Unknown twin-engine aircraft. Heading north-northeast. Believed attempting to reach Norway. He slid the paper forward, ready to leave, until a young clerk, holding another report, said quietly, "Sir, this might have been the last enemy plane shot down in Europe." Hale didn't answer. He just stared at the ink drying on his signature, thinking how small the moment looked on paper. Outside, the first light of dawn began to rise, a faint gray smudge on the edge of the sky. Somewhere east, the guns had already fallen silent. He walked back toward the Widow. The plane stood motionless on the tarmac, black paint soft in the early mist. Around him, men cheered, laughed, embraced. But their joy felt far away, almost unreal. Hale reached up and rested a hand on the cool metal of the fuselage. At that moment, he wasn't thinking about victory. He was thinking about the fire in the sky and the pilot inside the other plane, a man who, like him, had flown his last night of the war. For the rest of the world, it was peace. For the crew of the Widow, it would always remain one night they could never forget. August 1945, over Tokyo. Night above Japan wasn't truly dark anymore. From 20,000 feet, Tokyo glowed like an open wound, a red and orange sea that shimmered through the haze, pulsing with heat. The city burned so fiercely that it made its own weather. Even inside the cockpit of the Black Widow, the crew could feel the turbulence of rising air, the tremor of a world tearing itself apart. They had taken off from Iwo Jima 3 hours earlier, their mission simple on paper: escort the B-29 superfortresses during the night raids. Protect them from the last of Japan's fighters. Men who flew with no intention of returning. Lieutenant Mark Ellery flew with Corporal Ray Ito on radar. They'd flown together since the Marianas, long enough to trust silence more than words. The Widow's cockpit glowed dim green from the radar scope, its sweeping line turning like a heartbeat in the dark. Below, The Pacific stretched endless and black until the first faint orange stain appeared on the horizon. Tokyo. Ellery adjusted his course. Visual ahead. Ito nodded, not looking up. Radar confirms. Contacts, friendly stream. B-29 formation, 11 miles ahead. The Widow slipped into its escort slot, invisible in the darkness. Ahead, the bombers moved like slow-moving stars. Each one carried fire enough to erase a city block. The irony was never lost on Ellery, a night fighter built to protect machines that brought daylight to cities below. Then Ito's tone changed. New contact. Fast. Low altitude, coming in from the east. Ellery's pulse quickened. Could be a J-2M Raiden or a Key 45. Can you confirm? Too small for a bomber. Tight flight path. Looks like he's climbing for the bombers. Ellery banked left, throttles forward. The Widow's engines howled softly as they dove toward the threat. Outside, the air shimmered with the reflection of fire, so bright it dimmed the stars. For a moment, they saw him, a faint shape cutting through the haze, rising fast. The Japanese pilot wasn't attacking for survival. He was aiming for sacrifice. Got him, Ito said. Range, half a mile. Guns armed. Ellery's thumb pressed the trigger. The cannons roared. Red tracers reached out, a glowing chain across the night. They struck home. A flash, then a spiral of fire tumbling down toward the inferno below. Ito stared at the radar scope, voice flat. Target destroyed. No one cheered. There was nothing to celebrate. Just another light joining the thousands already burning. The bombers continued on, their formation steady. Below them, Tokyo looked like a star collapsing in on itself. Whole neighborhoods glowed white-hot. Even from miles above, they could see the shapes of rivers turned silver by firelight, and the faint outlines of bridges that no longer led anywhere. Ellery's radio crackled with clipped voices, bombs away, turning for home. He watched the first waves release their payloads, watched the falling lights vanish into smoke. Seconds later, the ground convulsed with shock waves, and the sky shimmered like heat over a desert. He could feel it even up here, a vibration that hummed through his bones. Ito's voice came again. Second contact. Coming up from the bay, small, erratic. Probably a Gecko night fighter. Copy. Let's intercept. They turned back, descending through scattered clouds. The radar's green glow showed the Japanese plane darting toward the bomber's tail. The Widow moved to intercept, smooth and fast. There, Ellery shouted. A streak of light crossed below them, the Gecko's engine flare. The gunner reacted instantly, sending a short burst of cannon fire. The tracers caught the target mid-climb. A second later, it exploded, scattering fragments into the Black Sea below. Then came silence. No more contacts. No more resistance. Only the low hum of their engines and the distant thunder from a city dying beneath them. For the first time that night, Ellery spoke quietly. How do you see it, Ray? Ito hesitated. Everything, he said. I can see everything. I wish I couldn't. The words lingered in the intercom like static. As they turned for home, dawn began to stain the eastern sky. The bombers glided ahead, engines steady, their bellies empty now. Behind them, the horizon glowed dull orange, the color of something ending. They landed at Iwo Jima just before sunrise. The ground crew waved them in, eyes red from the sleepless night. In the debrief tent, a young officer took notes without looking up. 2 confirmed kills, he said flatly. Good work, Lieutenant. But Ellery didn't answer. He just stared at his gloves, still smelling of gunpowder and sweat. Outside, the Widow cooled on the tarmac, black paint catching the first light of morning. The sky was pale now, washed clean, but the smell of smoke drifted even here. Ito leaned against the landing gear, eyes closed, saying nothing. They had done their duty, protected the bombers, fulfilled their orders. Yet neither man felt victorious. Somewhere behind them, Tokyo still burned. And for the first time, the hunters of the night felt like witnesses to something far larger than war. September 1945, Okinawa. The airfield was quiet now. No roar of engines, no orders over the radio. The Black Widows sat motionless under the pale sun, black paint dulled by salt and dust. For the first time in years, no one was afraid of nightfall. The war was over. The darkness that once hid enemies had nothing left to hide. Lieutenant Mark Ellery walked the line of parked aircraft, his boots crunching over coral dust. The planes looked like sleeping animals, wings folded, radar domes facing nowhere. Crews moved slowly, almost unsure what to do with their hands. Some packed boxes, others just stood by the machines that had carried them through hundreds of hours of night. A young radar operator closed his headset into a crate. "Feels wrong," he muttered. "Like turning off the stars." Nobody answered. Inside the operations tent, a clerk finished typing the last report. 127 confirmed victories, dozens of bombers saved. No successful night raids after February 1945. The paper smelled of ink and dust. He stacked it neatly, stamped it, and left it on a desk that no one would ever sit at again. The numbers looked clean. The memories didn't. Outside, the men gathered in small circles, voices low. A gunner traced his finger across the fuselage, following the scratches that marked each mission. A mechanic, still wearing his oil-stained shirt, ran a hand along a propeller blade. "She was faster than the dark," he said softly. Now the dark's caught up. Ellery sat on a crate beside his aircraft, helmet in his lap. He watched the sky, the same sky he had spent years hunting through, lit only by radar and tracer fire. It looked ordinary now, too blue, too still. He wasn't sure he liked it. Nearby, someone tuned a small radio. A song came through, a soft, wavering voice from home. The melody was gentle, but the men fell silent as if it might break. One by one, they turned away, each carrying his own weight of memory. In the records, the P-61 was a success story, a masterpiece of radar and firepower, a machine that turned night into an ally. But standing here, among the men who had flown it, victory felt quieter, stranger. They had spent years teaching themselves to see in the dark, and now there was nothing left to look for. A corporal wrote in his notebook, 3 years we hunted in shadows. Now the shadows hunt us in our sleep. He tore out the page and tucked it into his flight jacket. At dusk, the last engines were run one final time. Cylinders coughed, caught, and then faded into silence. Mechanics shut the fuel lines, tied down the propellers. The air smelled of warm metal and sea wind. Beyond the runway, waves broke softly against the reef. Ellery placed a hand on the widow's nose. "You got us home," he said quietly. No one heard him, and that felt right. The sun slipped under the horizon. The base lights went out one by one, until the field was swallowed in a darkness deeper than any radar could pierce. But this darkness wasn't an enemy anymore. It was something else, memory, perhaps, or peace. From the water came a faint reflection of stars. The men watched without speaking. For years, they had flown through skies where stars were only targets, distractions on the scope. Tonight, they were just stars again. The radio kept playing. Someone laughed softly. Someone else wiped his eyes and pretended not to. The night closed around them, not as a threat, but as an answer. They never saw her in the sky, but she had seen them all. And when the engines finally cooled and the last reports were filed away, the Black Widow left one final legacy. The war had ended, but the men who once ruled the darkness would carry a piece of it with them, quiet and permanent as breath.